Hi. So, I'm trying to figure out if it is merely arrogance or arrogant to speak of the role of poverty in racism. And not just the state of being impoverished, but the culture of poverty, which is an observable not factor, but well, it's measurable. It's observable. Like, there are cultures of poverty which appear to create more poverty. And it seems clear to me that any attempt to truly get rid of racism has to first, perhaps mostly, deal with the issue of poverty, of cultural poverty. The problem, of course, is that it's almost impossible to say that, because then you end up blaming the victim, right? But it's not a blame if it is a simple reality, right? It is simply the nature of certain mindsets to create poverty within the owners of those mindsets. Then what has to happen is the mindset has to change. Now, of course, the problem then is, how do you do that? I so do not feel comfortable posting this video. I'm not going to post this video. Wow. So, I have been considering the role of poverty in race, in racism, and in the mindset of poverty, which is something that has been quantified and measured to some degree, and it appears to be a thing, that there are mindsets that lead to poverty. But it seems to me that that is such a fraught discussion that it's impossible to have productively. It's not even productive to have that conversation if you are a critic of where the left goes wrong. Because if there's so there is a thing that happens in the far left in which they make everything about racism or misogyny or some other form of prejudice, and they make that everything, and they act as if there are no other problems to solve, and all problems, I don't know if they'd say this, but it's almost as if that's the only problem that matters, and we must stop all, even create new problems in the name of solving that problem. Then there is a reaction to that acts almost as if the only problem is the left's overreaction to prejudice. Both of those are wrong. Both of those are wrong in the sense that there are other problems. Things are more complicated. And I suppose the reason I got so irate in my last recording is because I'm so exhausted and tired of seeing people overreact. Which makes people very malleable and makes people's problems, game pieces in a political game, which I find utterly disgusting. So, what I'm attempting to get at instead, I suppose, is to simply talk about the value of removing from the equation the issue of prejudice when you are dealing with poverty and with almost any social problem that comes from having your inner culture not compatible with the larger culture, the larger external culture. Or the other way of saying that is to say that the inner culture of some groups are more able to survive and thrive than others. If your inner culture makes you a hard worker and insightful and visionary and able to sacrifice in the present in order to form a better future for yourself. All of that aside from whatever social or family advantages you may or may not get. Aside from all that, I mean, those are real. Those are real issues, but there are cultures aside from all that which are more productive than others and therefore more successful. And I'm simply saying we should be able to acknowledge that and deal with that. So treat poverty as this inner culture of a person that somehow needs to be reformed. It is, of course, the height of arrogance to assume one can do that. But perhaps the correct attitude then is to discover how one can provide tools of such high caliber for the individual that they may be able to do that for themselves. And make these tools, the thing I like to do, or like to think can be done, is to make these tools viral. Things that spread from person to person, that are so catchy and so memeified and so mimetic, I guess is the term, that it's a story that you can't help but tell. And it's a story that grabs you and reproduces itself in you. That is a dimension of why racism and other prejudice forms continue. If there were no differences between the different cultures, or different genders, or different, if there was, how do I say this? If everyone had a culture with a high work ethic, in a high, there's no simple solution. There's no simple solution, because there's always people that have greater advantages, and you can't get away from that. And then the other issue of that is, slips of mind. Thank you very much. So I will confess that I do not understand antisocial behavior and the arrogance of some people who appear to enjoy belittling others and making them uncomfortable. But I know there's a kind of humor associated with that. Shoot, my son frankly teases his sister nonstop. And I think of that as a form of this kind of behavior of an inner culture which destroys or makes, not destroy, that's too dramatic, an inner culture which makes one's outer, makes it more difficult for one to align with one's outer culture. Unless, of course, you're in a culture in which basically if you don't show yourself tough enough to give other people crap, then they will hound you endlessly. And so the way it's like everybody's got to be tough. I would have gotten myself killed if I had to exist in such a culture. But there are people who appear to figure out a way of surviving. All right, where am I going with this? I'm trying to speak to the difficulty that there is maybe in an extremely roundabout way, of trying to change cultures. Yes, it happens in each individual. And so if you can give tools that allow individuals to change themselves, the ideal is that they have more options then. I assure you, person from underprivileged black culture, if you follow this program or use these tools in, call it culture B, that you will be fine and that you will be successful. Where culture B is a certain culture that others have within them, right? That is emerging into the larger external culture. How do you get that culture B, though? And how do you get that product to someone in such a way that they trust it and that they use it and can use it? Those are all incredibly important questions if we are to truly end poverty and the racism that often associates or tags along with poverty. I think it is not that racism creates poverty, it's that racism tags along with poverty. That's my belief. I could be wrong, and I would like to be corrected if there's a way of doing that. I suppose a certain percentage of me thinks that if the majority believe that racism creates poverty, then that's probably wrong. But it's not just that, it's that there are good counter arguments that don't get addressed. If they got addressed, then again, that would probably go a long way in helping me believe. And that they don't get addressed appears to be something like, well, it depends on what circle you're in. I am digressing majorly, though. I want to back up because the product that can create a culture B, which is, a culture that is not exactly anti-racist. I want to say that because that's really deep-rooted. That is anti-outsider, right? So that's what racism, in effect, very often is simply outsider caution. So what has to happen in order for that kind of racism, so there is a racism that is plain old, I feel like my life is bad and I'm going to blame the black people or the red-skinned people or the yellow-skinned people, or I can't even believe anybody ever said yellow skin, but I just said it, so there you go. Those other people, they're the fault, not me, them. So that's that's one level of racism. Then there is, who are these people? Can I trust them? They are not a part of my culture. Then there is, I think there's also evolving a type of racism that is something like, oh, so you're going to try to force me to be not racist, huh? Well, I'll show you. And I think that's a real form of racism. I think that's really the cause of some racism. This desire to... And I guess it goes back to what I started with, which is there are people that just want to throw crap in your face that you don't like. And they get their jollies that way. And my son does that. Although I'm hoping it's basically a very innocent version of that, but it concerns me greatly, and I don't like it.